On July 14th, 1967, Leslie Arnold was the last inmate to successfully escape from the Nebraska State Penitentiary. His whereabouts remained a mystery until his death in 2010. This is his story. Hello, I am Sean, and welcome to my channel. If you are returning, then it's great to see you again. Twice a week, I research a true crime that I find interesting and tell you about it. I want to make sure that the victims are remembered, and there's a lot of victims to remember. If you are not subscribed, please do so. It's free. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I love seeing and interacting with my subscribers. If you want to support me in other ways, you can go to my Patreon. The description is down below, or the address is down below in the description. If you have any ideas for future crimes, please feel free to leave me a message. In fact, a friend of mine is the one who suggested this one here, so thank you, Matt, for that. Now on with today's true crime. William Leslie Arnold was born August 28th, 1942 in Omaha, Nebraska. His parents were Bill and Opal Arnold, and he had a little brother named Jimmy. Or Jim, I guess. He was 3 years younger than William. He grew up at 6477 Poppleton Avenue, overlooking the Exarban horse racing track. Fun fact, Exarban is Nebraska, spelled backwards. So, his father owned a regional office for Watkins products, and I believe they're still available, that you can buy like seasoning and stuff like that from Watkins. It was a direct sales company, and his mother was a homemaker. The Arnold family was well-to-do for the time. They owned 2 cars. One was actually a brand new, stylish 1957 Mercury. They even had a black and white TV. They seemed like the perfect family in the 50s, Leave It to Beaver, and stuff like that. But it wasn't as cozy as one would think inside the house on top of the hill. William started to use his middle name, Leslie, because he liked it better than William, I guess. Neighbors would later describe him as a temperamental and high-strung child. One of his friends stated that Leslie was an intelligent kid, and he is very talented, but he was just a little wound up tighter than the average person. In grade school, he used to get in trouble, but he eventually learned how to control his emotions. In class, at least. Leslie was in his junior year at Omaha Central High School. He was in the ROTC. He was in the band, and he loved playing his saxophone. He was also a B average student, and the teachers actually liked him pretty good. But he did get in trouble one time in school. He was written up for not wearing a belt. Didn't know that was a thing, but I guess part of the dress code and everything, and he was written up for not wearing a belt. What a hellraiser. What a nonconformist. But it was still a thing. He also participated in track, wrestling, and baseball. Along with playing in the band, he loved music, and he was a fanatic for Elvis. He even tried to wear his hair like Presley. He seemed like the average teen around school, but his anger still burned bright when he was at home. Little things would set him off. Things like putting together a plastic model. If it didn't come together well, he would just smash it all up. Another incident was when he was trying to wax the car. For some odd reason, when he was putting the wax on, it was not taking the the metal, and it just ticked him off. So he slammed his fists on the hood and then put a nice big dent in the hood. Leslie at home would put socks on his hands and beat up his brother Jim. Jimmy later recounted that his temper had not stopped once it exploded. He said, I always had a feeling he didn't understand why mom and dad had me when they already had him. Which could have been, a thing that he just didn't understand why he wasn't good enough for his parents. I don't know. Much of his anger and resentment, though, revolved around his mother. But there might have been reasons for this. Opal was said that she called the shots in the household. Leslie explained to his psychologist later on that his mother ruled and domineered the household, and that he was actually a victim to some of her controlling ways. One time he recalled that she made him cut the grass 3 different times because it was not to her liking. Some grass just didn't get cut properly, so it was a little higher, and she would measure it, and she just kept making him recut the grass. She also made fun of his music and never attended any of his games. But she always showed all this favoritism toward Jim. Maybe that's why in this one family picture that I have, it is the family minus Leslie. Neighbors actually noticed this too. A former neighbor, Woody Dillman, stated that Jimmy was treated like an only child sometimes. And, if the neighbors notice it, maybe something is off. One major clash was over the family cars. Opal would let Leslie make plans, and then she would change her mind right at the last second. So if he was going to go someplace using the car, she'd be like, oh, no, you can't now. Leslie started dating a girl named Crystal from Omaha North High School. They had been going steady for months, and his mother was completely against this relationship and called her family trash. Her dad was a truck driver, and Leslie thought that this is the reason his mom thought that the family was trash, because, a truck driver is not reputable back then. I don't know. They had repeated arguments over this too. If you're familiar with the Omaha area, I believe back then more prominent people lived where the Arnolds lived, and lower class lived north of there. Yeah, lots of red lines in this town. According to Leslie, his mother had kicked him out of the house 3 different times. Occasionally he would sleep in the stables at Exarban, since it was a horse racing track and they had stables. One time he actually took a job as a live-in caretaker for an apartment building. Leslie stated that there were times that his mother would even lock his dad out of the house. So there was something wrong with Opal. He said that his dad would tell him that he needed to tolerate her behavior. This was the price they had to pay to keep the family together. If you look back in the 40s and 50s, a lot of times mental health and everything was just never talked about and brushed under the carpet. And yeah, later Leslie recalled that family members had told him that his mother was hospitalized for nervous breakdowns on at least 2 different occasions. This was a common term back then for a mental illness episode. Um, but the subject was such a huge taboo, and treatment of people that were hospitalized for mental illness oh, was barbaric, to say the least. What happened to her in those stints is unknown, but it could have made things worse in the long runs, especially if she's getting shock therapy or things like that. It can really blow with the brain. Jim, even though he was 3 years younger than Leslie, he did recall that his mother was ill on many occasions, but it was never quite explained to him, so he never actually knew what that meant. So, on the morning of September 27th, 1958, Leslie was so excited. That evening he was going to take out the new Mercury and drive his best gal, Crystal, and go on a date. At 11 a.m., he was talking to her on the phone. And he was talking on the phone, and they had a really long cord, so he had to stretch it under a doorway and around the corner. And he was sitting on the stairs, went upstairs to his bedroom, trying to do this for some privacy. And Opal didn't like that. Opal started yelling at him, saying that any conversation said behind closed doors was not worth saying. She also said that Crystal was no good, and Leslie worried that, since Crystal was on the other line, that she might have heard what her mom or what his mom said. This set him off. He told her that if she continued to treat Crystal like this, she was going to be sorry. She said she wasn't going to take this from him, and said that going to the drive-in that evening was off. Well, he was ticked off, so he punched the wall. She sent him to his room. Upstairs, he was just listening to his records, thinking of a way that he could get his mom to reconsider her punishment, because he really wanted to go out on this date with her tonight. He went downstairs to talk to her, and they began arguing again. She told him to go outside and cool off. He went outside, walked around for a while, and then he returned back to his room. In his words, he got a crazy idea in his head. Around 2:30 p.m., he went to the closet in his parents' room and grabbed the .22 caliber Remington rifle. He had used this one as, to go hunt rabbits with, so he was familiar with the gun. Before he knew it, he was in the dining room, holding the gun, confronting his mom again. He told her that he had no intentions of shooting her, but he just wanted her to know how serious he was and how badly he wanted to go with Crystal that night. This is when the mother stood in the doorway, looked at him, and started laughing at him. "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" she says. With that, he raised the gun, pulled the trigger, and she fell to the ground in pain. Later, he said that he did not want to hurt his mom anymore, but could just still hear her laughing at him, even though she was crying in pain. But in his head, she was laughing at him. So he stood over her and fired 6 more shots into her chest. He said that she was in pain and he wanted to end that pain, and so he just kept shooting. Trying to put her out of her misery, I guess. I'm not sure. As she was dying, he said that he told her he loved her and that he was sorry. At this moment, his father came through the front door with groceries. He saw his wife on the floor and his son with a gun, and he's like, "What did you do?" He charged Leslie and took a swing at him, but he missed. He looked at Opal and then tried to go for Leslie again. This time, Leslie raised the gun and fired. His dad fell onto the floor next to his mom. Leslie then shot him another 6 times in the chest. Horrified by what he had done, he ran into the living room. He kept asking himself, what did he do? What did he do? What did he do? He just laid on the couch and cried. It took him a while, but eventually he composed himself and he came up with a plan. He drugged both of his parents downstairs into the basement. He rolled up the bloody rug and took it to the garage. He contacted a former neighbor, Rose Grossman, and told her that his grandparents were traveling by train to California. He said that his grandfather wandered off in Wyoming and that his grandmother couldn't find him. So his parents hopped on the train to go help. He also asked if she could take care of Jim until they came back. She said she would, and when Jim got back from working at Exarban Rodeo, Leslie took him straight over there, and Jim didn't think anything of it. Returning home, Leslie looked around and decided to get ready for his date. He went and picked up Crystal and her brother. Then they went to the drive-in at 84th and Center. It was a double feature. The comedy was No Time for Sergeants, and then followed by a horror film called The Undead. When the movie was over, they went to Tiner's Drive-In. It was a burger and malt shop at 44th and Dodge. After that, he took her brother and her home. With her, he wasn't thinking about his parents. But soon it would be in his face again. At home, he was freaked out about staying in the house with their bodies. He actually thought about sleeping in his car, but it was too cold that night and he didn't want to freeze to death out there. So he went up to his room, locked himself in his room, turned on the radio, and went to sleep. In the morning, he went to church. The sermon was all about crime. He kind of felt like it was directed toward him in his mind. He started to cry and didn't want to draw suspicion, so he left and went home. Once there, he started to initiate the rest of his plan. He was going to dig a hole in the backyard and place his parents in there, but he had to wait till nighttime to do all this stuff. Way back in the back corner, under a lilac bush, is where he started to dig. It was exhausting work, and he wanted to nap afterwards, but he knew he had to continue doing this to get it done. And he needed to build courage for the next part. Luckily, he was doing this at night because he had to drag his parents up the staircase into the garage, through the front garage door, around the front of the house, to the side gate, and into the backyard, to the back corner where he placed the bodies. And he had to do that twice. So luckily nobody was driving by or walking by or anything like that. Because I was thinking this was like the middle of the night, but it was still early. It was just dark out. He said a quick prayer over their bodies and then began covering them with dirt. He took the bloodied rug and drove it out to 80th and F Street, where he dumped it into the big Papillion Creek off of a bridge. Around midnight, so that's why I'm saying this was all early, because he did all this stuff, and it was just midnight that he decided to knock on the Grossman's door. He told Rose that he was kind of scared to sleep by himself alone, and he wanted to see his brother. So she let him in. He went and stayed with Jimmy, but she noticed that on both of his hands they were lined with broken blisters, and she found that a little odd, but she didn't say anything about it. But yeah, using that shovel for the first time probably caused all those blisters. Monday morning came, and he had one more task to do. He had to go to his dad's office and he needed to talk to one of his dad's associates or assistants. He told the assistant about his dad's trip and said, "Hey, could you take over for the time being while dad is away?" And the assistant's like, "Yeah, sure, that's fine." So then he decided to go to school. He started settling in on a daily routine, and after about 5 days, he and Jimmy actually moved back into the house. And if anyone ever asked about his parents, he just said that they were away on a trip. Easy peasy. On October 5th, it was 8 days after the killings, and then he was panic stricken. When he arrived home, his grandparents were there, the ones that his parents went looking for. Uh, the elder Arnolds were concerned that they hadn't heard from the family for a while, so they traveled from North Loop, Nebraska, and came there to question Leslie about this. He offered them evasive answers. 2 days later, his grandmother decided to go over to Rose Grossman's and see what Opal and Bill might have said, as instructions for while they were gone. That's when Rose told her what Leslie told her about grandfather wandering off and that they went to help them. Well, this opened up a bunch of suspicion on both sides. Rose started to do some detective work and found out that there was actually no train that left the station when Leslie said that his parents left. She also found from another neighbor that Opal and Leslie had been having violent arguments prior to the disappearance. On Friday, October 10th, Rosie decided to call the police department and told them what she learned. That night, Crystal took Leslie to the Central High football game. There, they watched a very talented sophomore running back, future Chicago Bears running back Gale Sayers. He tore up the field that night. At this same time, his grandparents went to the police. So both Rose and his grandparents reported to the police on Friday about his parents being disappeared. Saturday morning came and Leslie was picked up by two detectives. Downtown, Detective John Barnes questioned Leslie. He broke down and eventually told them everything. So just right before noon, or around noon, lunchtime, he was taken back to the house. He was handcuffed with an officer on each arm. So that seems kind of weird, but he was handcuffed with a cop on each arm. And he led the group back to the backyard. The group was not only just police officers, they were neighbors that filtered into this crowd. And there were a reporter and photographers that were all part of this crowd trying to get everything taken into account. It surely was a different time. Leslie pointed out the spot where they were buried, and police officer Paul Slinkard started to turn over the loose soil. With only a couple flips of the earth, there was a hand exposed. A neighbor uttered, "Oh, Leslie, how could you do it?" And he looked at her and his lip was trembling, but he said nothing. The World Herald's headlines the next day was, "Youth kills father, mother to get own way with car." Doesn't even make sense. Youth kills father, mother to get own way about car. That doesn't make sense. But it's all about the shock and awe about it all. So it worked because the murder captivated the city. Gawkers drove by the house all weekend just to catch a glimpse of this house. Jokingly, a couple neighbors said that they should set up a Kool-Aid stand just to make a little extra money. And they probably would have made a killing. no pun intended. So Leslie was charged Monday morning with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He could get the death penalty or death sentence for this. Now, for him at court, he decided to take a plea deal, and he pled guilty to 2 reduced counts of second-degree murder. And this was on June 2nd, 1959. He was sentenced to be imprisoned at a prison for hard labor for the remainder of his natural life. A week later, he was driven to the state penitentiary in Lincoln. But his life wasn't over. Not just yet. In prison, he was classified as a model prisoner. There was even talks about him being pardoned, possibly, and going free because they didn't see him as a habitual criminal or anything like that. Well, Leslie thought early release sounded like a great idea, but he took it into his own hands. On July 14th, 1967, he and James Harding escaped from the prison. They were in the prison music room, and they cut through the bars of a window and slipped out of the building. They also had to climb a 12-foot high barbed wire fence using their shirts to try to protect them from it. But I'm assuming they still got hurt. I mean, they escaped. They escaped. Harding did not fare as well, though, because he was captured a year later. But Leslie was nowhere to be found. Harding even told investigators that they split up in Chicago. So, I mean, they had leads of where to go, and they couldn't find him. On November 25th, 1967, Leslie married Jeannie Bouvier. I mean, he was using an alias. His alias was John Damon. And I believe they're still living in Chicago at this time. In 1969, he moved to Cincinnati. And then in 1971, he moved to Miami. But on July 27th, 1977, he filed for divorce, and it was granted February of 1978. Well, while in Los Angeles in 1983, he remarried and became a biological father for the first time in 1986 to a daughter. 5 years later, his son was born. In 1992, he and the family moved to New Zealand. And then in 1997, they moved to Australia. Sadly, on August 6th, 2010, William Leslie Arnold, going by the name John Vincent Damon, died at the age of 67 in Brisbane, Australia. Well, actually, it was the Tamborine Mountains just south of Brisbane, but most reports say Brisbane, so we'll go with Brisbane. But Tamborine Mountains, that sounds really neat. It was not until 2023 that it was revealed that John Vincent was William Leslie. He told his children that he was an orphan, and after killing his parents, he kind of was. Leslie's son wanted to know more about his dad, as he was only 19 when his dad died. So he visited Chicago in 2018 and found out that the birth certificate was a fake. Then he decided to take a DNA test from Ancestry.com and was contacted by marshals in 2022. U.S. Marshal Service Officer Jeff Britton started working the case and became obsessed with it for 9 years from 2004 to 2013. One of those days, he actually drove 5 hours to see James Arnold, who was not going by Jimmy anymore. Britton wanted to get a DNA test or DNA sample from him to be able to put it on an ancestry site just in case, he was hoping for a lead, and he was hoping that it would connect with somebody else that was looking for, family. But of course came up with nothing for years. Then one day they got a hit from a man in Chicago that was looking for his father. Leslie's son didn't want to be identified, so his privacy is his privacy, and nobody has released what his name is. He did speak to Britain and got his father's story. His son also spoke to CNN privately, and they got a quote from him. The quote was, "There is no warning label on the DNA test kits telling you that you might not like what you find." He also added, "But I don't regret it. I'm glad I know the truth about my dad." James Arnold has never forgotten about his brother. He holds so much animosity toward him for making him an orphan. He has said that it's only recently that he had finally gotten over the nightmares and anger and guilt that has tormented him for decades. In April of 2023, the U.S. Marshal Office in Omaha, Nebraska officially closed the fugitive case on Leslie Arnold. And this is the end of his story. Once again, mental illness destroyed a family. Was it just teenage angst that caused this crime, or were there other mental issues that was flooding Leslie's brain? And like I said, they didn't discuss mental health much back then. So what was Opal dealing with? There's so many different mental disorders that pass genetically from person to person. Was there something that she had that was triggered, that made him the way he did? But the bad thing is, it said that, after he was a model prisoner and from what they've said and that I could find anything about it, his family life, as an adult, he was a great father. He was a great husband. And no other issues about any of that. So, I don't know. So, sometimes you don't know what's going to make a person snap. So, very sad story. Thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed, as always, please do so. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. Love you all. See you next time. Bye.